Hello and welcome back to the channel. This video doesn't really involve Oxygen, but it does involve WordPress and Fluent Forms, although this would work with about any form plugin out there. But the goal of the project was to make it easier for a user of the website to enter in the vehicle information. This is going to be a somewhat of a classified vehicle site, or a vehicle classifieds site where you can sell your vehicle. So it's pretty important that we gather information quickly and easily. And after a little bit of looking around, I found a vehicle API, VIN number decoder API, and it's maintained by what looks like a government agency, and it's free, and the rate limits are pretty decent. So I don't think it will ever be a problem with our usage. And you can get a lot of information back from here in a couple different formats. It's pretty easy to use. So let's go ahead and walk through how it works and a little bit maybe explaining the code behind it. So to get started, let's run through the form and let's just show how it works. I've got a VIN number here just from a VIN number generator tool. So let's grab that, paste that into the VIN number field, and once we hit the decode VIN number button, we should see some, hopefully most, of these fields down here populate. They won't all populate correctly because I think it's kind of up to the manufacturer how much information they've submitted to this database, but we should see some of them populate. So this is a 2015 Acura TLX that we currently are working with. So let's go ahead and decode this VIN, and we can see that that did populate correctly. So it's a 2015 TLX, fuel is gasoline, it's a two-wheel drive, and the trim and the make all pulled in correctly. So we can see a little bit more here. I currently have this logging to the console just while I was working on this. And so we'll get into this a little bit more in the code, but here you can see all of the information. It's returning a little bit more than I'm even using, obviously. This is the information that I've already worked with and gotten into a usable format for what I'm doing with it. And this is the raw results, which is a little bit more confusing. So let's jump into the code here. I'm using Fluent Forms in this example, and I'm just dropping this JavaScript right into the form. So that's where it's put. And here's the code. We'll just quick step through it. First off, after the window has fully loaded, we're finding all the elements that we need to make this work. So the first element is our VIN field. That's this field right here. The next element is our VIN button that actually fires off the JavaScript. And then the rest of these are all of the form elements that we want to fill with the response from the vPIC API. So here we're attaching an event listener to this button. And it's a little bit interesting. I had to use this prevent default function, or else this button on the form would also trigger the form validation and would invalidate all of these fields because they weren't full yet. So adding the prevent default here solved that issue. So here is where we actually create the URL and use the fetch API to collect the information that we need. So what we're doing is we're getting the VIN field that we already selected here and inserting it into this URL, and then we're also asking for the JSON format. Once this has returned a response, then we're going to move on. First, we're going to check to make sure that the status was okay. If not, we're going to log the error so we have something to work with, and then return. However, if the status is okay, we'll bypass this, and then we're going to take the response and turn it into something usable. So as we were seeing here, if we jump back into here, the raw results are a little bit hard to work with. So we've got an object with a ton of different, I think we're up to like 136 different values here. So what we're doing here is we're actually taking and just mapping this into something, into a JavaScript object that's a little bit easier for us to work with. Because we do have to do a little bit of checking some if statements here, because we need to fill some drop downs here. So like the gasoline, diesel, the fuel drop down, and the drive drop down for sure. So let's go ahead and see how that works. Some of this, of course, can just be mapped straight across. And so what's happening here is we are saying that we want to take the year value from our JavaScript response, and we want to set the year filled value to the response that we got for the year. So then that comes here and it fills, it sets the value here on our form. So some of these that works for. However, it gets a little bit more interesting here with some of like the fuel response that is returned. So if we look back at the raw response here that we're getting, let me see if I can find it here. Okay. Now, we're never quite sure exactly what's going to get returned here. Again, I think this is somewhat dependent on the manufacturer. So what I decided to do, what seemed like a fairly consistent way of doing it here, was simply to search for the string in the response value. So what we're doing is we're saying that if there is a response for the fuel, then if it includes gas, then set the fuel filled value to gas. Else, if it includes diesel, and then we're just logging if it returns an unknown value. And the same thing gets repeated for the transmission and the drive. So 4-wheel drive, 2-wheel drive. And here we're checking for quite a few more things, because sometimes we'll get a 4x4 back, sometimes we'll get all-wheel drive, or sometimes we'll get 4-wheel drive as a response. So any of those are equal to a 4-wheel drive vehicle. This might change. I'm not sure exactly how we'll designate some of this all, but the basic idea should work. Same goes for 2-wheel drive. Sometimes that's returned as 4x2, front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive. All of these are equal to a 2-wheel drive vehicle, and that's good enough for our filtering purposes on this site. So that pretty much covers how this is working, I think. Hopefully some of you find this interesting. I will probably link this GitHub gist and also the form JSON export if you would like to take a closer look.